NFPA 70E, CSA Z462, 2021 editions. So what we'll be talking today for this 2-hour long is primarily the changes in 2021 editions of both NFPA 70E and also CSA Z462. And also Terry will talk about the similarities and differences when you compare both the standards. So I think we have so many attendees online today. I think we had about 850 people who registered for this webinar. We would like to cover as much as possible. Before going forward, I'd like to make a few notes here. So one is, make sure that as you're going through the webinar that you have any questions, please feel free to type in those questions using the webinar dashboard, and we'll answer them at the end as time permits. And secondly, we'll talk through the agenda and also a few disclaimers, okay? So going to the next slide here. So as some of you know, my name is Bhanu Srilla. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing here at Grace Technologies. I've been with Grace a little over 5.5 years and coming to 6 years this June-July timeline. Before coming to Grace, I spent about 20 years in electrical power generation and distribution industry, primarily with medium voltage and low voltage switchgear controls and such. And then since I joined Grace, I've been heavily involved with electrical safety. As most of you know, the Grace product line focuses primarily on permanent electrical safety devices, programming ports, and other IIoT-based technology solutions. I'm also an IEEE member, and in addition to that, I also sit on the safety, standards technical panel for UL 508A, UL 61010, and also UL 1436 standards. And also I'm a certified electrical safety compliance professional from NFPA, and also a certified reliability leader from Reliability Web, and also a CMRP certified reliability and maintenance professional from SMRP organization. My background is electrical engineering, and I'm pretty passionate about electrical safety, okay? So with that, I will go to the next slide. I'll ask Terry to introduce himself.
Thanks, Bhanu. Really looking forward to this webinar today with you to talk about 70 and Z462, the 2021 edition. So my background is electrical engineering as well, 29 years experience. 13 years of that has specifically been devoted to electrical safety. I worked in the oil and gas industry and consulting engineering before that. I'm a founding member and currently a first pass by chair of the CSA Z462 Workplace Electrical Safety Standard. Again, the purpose of our webinar today is to discuss obviously Z462 and 70, but I'm a founding member and I'm a voting member. And I'm currently the working group leader for Clause 4.1 and the annexes. I'm a voting member on the IEEE 1584 Guide for Performing Arc Flash Hazard Calculations Tech Committee. I'm also a founding member on CSA Z463, which is Maintenance of Electrical Systems for Canada. Again, that's the equivalent of NFPA 70E, but totally different content for Canada. And my consultancy is I provided electrical safety consulting for the last 13 years, electrical safety program development, external electrical safety audits, electrical safety competency validation, arc flash and shock training services. I am also very passionate about electrical safety. If you have seen me on webinars or presenting at conferences, I'm really, this is what I live and do, and I just want to share what I know with respect to the practical and realistic interpretation of these standards and the related standards. So again, I quote, I'm a pioneer in electrical safety, and I look forward to today's webinar. Thanks, Bhanu.
All right, thanks, Terry. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to make a few disclaimers here because this is, again, on 70E standards and also Z462 standards. So the information presented in the technical seminar is the opinion and interpretation of the information presented by Grace Technologies and me, Bhanu Srilla, and T.W. Becker, Electrical Safety Consulting, and Terry Becker. Grace Technologies and myself, Bhanu Srilla, does not accept any liability for the information provided. So is T.W. Becker, Electrical Safety Consulting, and Terry Becker accepts no liability for the information provided. Because, and also I think, as Terry said, Terry also sits on the CSA Z462 committee as well as a voting member. So he just want to make sure that's his own personal opinions. We're not bringing in the standards committees into the picture, okay? You're advised to consult NFPA and the published 2021 edition, and also for any specific interpretation you require on that. And you can directly reach out to them, and there's a lot of wealth of information on the standards website itself. which we'll talk about it as we go through the standards in depth, okay? And also you are advised to consult with the CSA group and the published 2021 edition for any specific interpretation matters that you require with the standards itself, okay? So not all potential changes will be discussed or reviewed during this presentation. This is primarily because the content is so much that we can't cover every piece, nuts and bolts. But as you go through the presentation, if you think any specific topic or any specific area of interest that really applies to you, please feel free to type in your question. We'll definitely see if time permits, we'll answer those questions as well, okay? So information on the 70E21 edition is available on NFPA website. And as some of you know, I'm not sure, I came to know that all the standards are available for free. If you want to just go through the standards and just look through that for your own copy, you can just go and browse the entire standard on your web browser. It's completely free of cost. NFPA does such a great job. So you can just look at all those things for free as well, okay? So there's some links provided on the website, and we'll definitely share this recorded webinar after the presentation is done. Nick will send out a follow-up emails, and also we'll share the PDF version of the slide deck for you to use and share within your groups as well, okay? And additionally, you can also buy 70E standards and CSA on the respective websites if you choose to. Okay, with that, I'm gonna go to next slide, where we'll talk about what we'll be covering specifically within this webinar for 2 hours. As I mentioned, it's long. It's about 83 or 84 slides as I looked through this morning. Terry and I reviewed this, and it's a huge conversation, and it's going to be a lot of things that we'll be talking about. So we'll talk about USA and Canada technical harmonization, because there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of historical information that goes between these two standards as the line. And then Terry will talk about this. We'll talk about NFPA 70E, the technical committee and the process. So when I say it, it's basically what is this revision cycles looks like and how the standards develop or evolve from edition to edition. So we'll talk about basically what is required, and if you're actively involved in the 70E committees or Z462 committees, thank you so much for involvement. And if someone wants to be involved, definitely there are avenues that you can do so. And 70E has a standard development process where everybody can go and input their opinions, or as in the form of public inputs, and there's deadlines defined in the website as well, nfpa.org. You can go and look through that. We'll just walk you through some of those details as well, right? And also CSA Z462 technical committee and process, which Terry will explain. And then we'll talk about the interpretation and application as they relate to not only understanding the standard, what it means, right? So understanding how does it imply to your practical application is one of the major areas what we really focus upon when it comes to Grace Technologies or Terry Becker from TW Becker Electric Consulting. So we'll talk about NFPA 70E 2021 changes. So when I say the changes, again, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'll not be reviewing line to line or every change within the standard. We picked some of the areas that makes huge importance for the audience, and just we pick some of those things that what we think are relevant from the changes. We'll talk about those, and Terry will talk about the Z462 changes and update, and also the key differences between 70E and Z462 as well. And the last bullet, 2 bullets, or one thing is we want to just bring in the additional value. Terry has a lot of experience, about 3 decades on electrical safety itself. So he's going to bring in his expertise from IEEE 1584 new standards and what really changed as this new standards was published in 2018, and how does it impact both 70E and CSA Z462. And then the last two things we're going to touch are Arc Flash PP evolution and what's been included, because there is something that's been added to Z462 on the category 5, and which is not on the 4 because the standards has not been revised. 1584 was not revised and established before 70E went into publication in 2021 edition. And finally, we'll conclude with some closing thoughts, okay? So with that, Terry, I would just like to hand it over to you, because you know the nuts and bolts from when you involved in 70E 3 decades or 2 decades ago. So you want to just give our audience introduction of the harmonization and such, please.
Yeah, thanks, Bhanu. So again, I think, as you just said, a lot of people don't know the background and history, and I think today's webinar is unique because we're going to bring you Canada and the US and blend the conversation. So basically, the process has started with NFPA 70 being published first in 1979, and it focused on safe installations, and it went through some derivations when I got involved in the 2004 edition had been published, I think that's when we really had the current version of 70E with the inclusion of the hazardous category tables and more of a focus on arc flash, and a lot of the replicated information from NFPA 70, the National Electrical Code, had been deleted. All right, so that's when I got involved. Is in Canada, we ended up deciding, well, I didn't decide actually. I went to an IEEE PCIC conference, found out about 70E. I came back to Canada. I said, we have a problem. We don't have arc flash identified. We haven't dealt with shock, and shock's another passion of mine, that we really need to spend more attention on shock than we are. I approached the CSA group at that time and said, are we going to do anything in Canada about arc flash and shock? They said, well, no, and this is in 2005. They phoned me back and said, well, we signed an MOU with NFPA to harmonize standards for North America, and you weren't the only person asking about NFPA 70E, so we've selected it. And CSA had signed an agreement with NFPA to take NFPA 70 as a C document for CSA Z462 workplace electrical safety. So CSA constituted a technical committee, and that's when I got involved. And I became the first vice chair at that time. This is in 2006 when we constituted Z462. And our tactic from the beginning was to remain harmonized with 70E. All right, and that'll be later on in webinar when we talk about harmonization. The harmonization has been maintained, but we're deviating in the 2021 editions between Z462 and 70E. All right, so basically what evolved is we published CSA Z462. Technically it says 2008, but it was January 2009. Bhanu, can you advance the slide?
Sure.
So again, here's the MOUs and the harmonization, and again, they selected 70E, as I mentioned, and we constituted the tech committee and published it technically December 2008, but it says it's aligned with the 2009 edition. And then we started to evolve it, and we did diverge with some of the annexes originally. So the core articles and clauses we stayed aligned and harmonized, but then we in Canada wanted some annexes. And they weren't accepted in 70. We actually submitted them to be included in 70, but the 70 tech committee rejected them. The other thing too is I have attended all NFPA 70E tech committee meetings since 2007. And that was in San Diego, the first one I went to as a guest, and I've maintained attending all of them as a guest, but I'm also recognized by many members on the NFPA 70 tech committee as a Canadian subject matter expert, and obviously unofficially attending as a CSA Z462 tech committee member. So I've been able to stay astride of things as they're happening down there. And then we decided what to do with Z462 until the 2021 edition, where we've now diverged. So we have some annexes that are very valuable that I encourage NFPA 70 users. It's probably worth it for you to buy Z462 and have both of these standards for Canada. And can you advance the slide? So again, we've now published a 5th edition of Z462, and the changes are slowing down because we were technically harmonized with 70E. Now, that said, we did have some technical divergence, which we will cover, all right? So generally, we had cleanup and reorganization, but the technical changes and divergence, we have this new alternate arc flash PP category table. It's now called Table V1, and we have a new arc flash PP category 5, minimum 75 calories per centimeter squared ATPB, and we'll cover that a little later, but I wanted to highlight here at the beginning that that's a significant technical divergence that in the US you're going to go, this is the first time we've heard of it. Well, would it be the first time you've heard of it? And that's why I encourage you after today's webinar that you possibly want to buy a copy of Z462 for this new arc flash PP category 5 that we've added, and the new table V1. Next slide, Ben. So really, this is just a graphic of the evolution from the 04 edition, and then you can map Z462 against 70E. And I've got that red, vertical bar, but what happened is 70E and Z462 would prominently identify the hazards, and let's put PP on workers. And then what happened was in 2015, the risk assessment procedure was added, and it has evolved significantly as well. Now, we've remained harmonized on that content, the risk assessment procedure, and the content growth in the 018 and now the 2021 edition, we're harmonized. There is one change on that, is that the normal equipment condition, we put that under risk assessment, and 70E doesn't have it under risk assessment. And in reality, normal equipment operation should be part of your overall jobs risk assessment procedure. right? So that's just one technical, content diversion, not technical. Next slide.
So this one I'll speak to Terry. This one I took the snip from NFPA website itself. This is on the NFPA standard development process. As you look through this is a very detailed process, right? So everybody is invited to participate in this standards development because it's a consensus standard. So there's like different stages. As you look through the slide, there's a step one where you put the public input stage, because all you need to do is you need to have a user credentials to log in the website. So once you put the once you log in with the user credential access, which you can sign up for free with NFPA website, nfpa.org, you can go to that standard 70E and you look at the next edition where you can go and put in the step one, which is like a public input stage. You can, if you have any kind of differences between the standard, or if you think that something has to be changed, or if you think something has to be added to that standard, so this is your great opportunity. So you can go and use this website and create a user ID and login credentials, and you can put those public inputs. You can go and redline and give a justification of why you think what you need, what you think has to be put into the document, and why you think that something has to be changed or modified than what is presently called out in the standard itself. So you can just go through this process as is shown on the screen. Step one is public input stage, where it will go through the public input closing. By the way, the public inputs are closing on June 1st for 2024 edition, and the public inputs open once the standard gets published. So meaning this was published in August, September timeline in 2020, the 2021 edition was. So since then, this public input phase is open for the audience to go and make any kind of inputs, what they would like to see as a change in the 2024, because most of the time this revisions take about 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years before it gets published, because that's so detailed and lengthy process it is, and because it involves a lot of people. It involves the cross-industry members representing from manufacturers, from the inspectors, from the courts and panels, from the non-voting members, from the consensus, from the other standards as well, like CSA Z462 non-voting members and such. So it's such a lengthy process, very detailed process. Make sure that you go through this document, so you can put this first input stage, which is coming due on June 1st, 2021, and then they will have the first report posted after that meeting, like 2-3 months later, and then based on their responses to the first stage inputs, you can also go and add the comments, which is your next opportunity, because if something got rejected in the first one, you can go and tell them your detailed explanation of why it is so and what needs to be, and provide additional clarification as such is required. That's a step two, which is like public comment stage, and then they'll have a meeting, which is like almost a year later, the first meeting, and then the next one is NITMAM closing, where they can just look at notice to take action. So that's one of the things where they will finalize the standards, and then the standard gets published. So this is kind of a 3-year process. That's why they opened it in 2020 in fall, right after this document is published. So you can go and do all the work, and it takes a lot of time to get that. I think probably 2024 edition will get published in 2023 around fall time, based on my experience of what I've been seeing throughout the time. Okay. So this is, again, a few snips from the website, where you look at from the standard itself, how you can do this and what needs to be done as part of public comment through online submission system, where you can redline the stuff, where you can add the additional comments, and where exactly in specific sections you want to add or delete or modify. So everything is detailed out on the website, and also on the standards book as well, how to do this. So you can just go through that. And then this is exactly the location snapped from the website, where you'll click on the NFPA 70E. So there is a free access, if you can see the point where I'm pointing the screen. So you can see the entire document for free. It's available for free. If you want to download, it's available for purchase. So you can just buy it, or you can just look at completely online and look at it. So here, when you look at the next edition, when you click on the next edition button, that's where it takes you to next edition. And then I'm going to skip to the next slide to show you what exactly is involved, right? So this is like different types of meetings and timelines. So whenever they have this public inputs closed, they'll have a meeting, and then they will publish the entire report on this website itself for you to go and look at what's going on with all the inputs and what the comments has been made, right? So this is one of the things, right? So we're looking at one of the comment section where someone has put the notes here. I mean, basically, you can look at the entire documentation. It's about 300 pages or 400 pages document of every public input that gets reviewed by the technical committee during those meetings. So make sure if you have a question or a comment, please make sure that you go and voice your opinion or input to this, and the due date is June 1st, 2021. So, and then once the first draft report, second draft report is published, and then you'll get to the final standards publication. So with that, I'm going to put on the screen the quick dates as I look at it. Revision cycle is annual 2023. Please make sure these dates on your calendar. So you can't complain after the deadlines pass, right? So you can't just say on July or August, I wish I just added this. So mark your calendars. And if you really have an input, please do so. And the technical committee, from my experience, I've been involved in attending the meetings since 2018 and 19. And those two meetings, I know they spent the entire day in that hotels, banquet halls, and then the conferences. They just go through every comment. There is not such thing that my comment was not looked at. They will go through every comment and address everything. So that's such a detailed process. So please feel free to take a note of all these dates on the screen. And then, please input your inputs before June 1st if you want your voice to be heard. With that, I will ask Terry to explain about CSA process, Terry.
So CSA group is not as formal. Again, Bhanu, you advanced a couple slides.
Wait a second. Sorry, Terry. Okay, there you go. Sorry.
So CSA group, the process is not as formal as NFPA, and I just want to emphasize that this front end very quickly, a lot of people don't understand, and really it's important that you put in public comments. And you need, as Bhanu just said, to get them in now before the end of June for NFPA 70E. The more public comments we have, the more improvements and clarification will come to the standard, right? And the tech committee has to address all of those public comments, both in Canada and the US. Our process is still formal, but there's a form, and you submit the form to CSA. It's not online, it's still manual, right? So we just don't have the software tool for CSA group, but I really want to encourage everybody on both sides of the border. If there are Canadian listeners today, which there are, we need your comments. We had 0 comments on every edition of Z462 in Canada, and that's sad. The users need to know that you can influence, but you have to submit comments. You have to ask for technical clarification as well directly from Z462, which is very important in this current edition with respect to the inclusion of 240-volt single phase as sustaining an arcing fault, which I'll get to later. All right, I noticed there's a couple questions, and we did take NFPA 70E, but CSA had to make it look like a CSA standard. So we had to Canadianize it. We adopted 70E, but we Canadianized it as far as the look and the appearance, and then we have our own tech committee. So then we had the ability to add content to it. Another question came in about OSHA and using Z462. 70E is not adopted into law, right? So if you use another standard voluntarily, and I tell people standards are tools, so get as many toolboxes as you can, and use them. If you use content from Z462, it enhances your due diligence to OSHA. So get both and use content from both now with the divergence we have, like the additional annexes in Z462. All right, so as far as interpretation, again, they're not adopted into law. They're industry accepted best practices, which really a lead into the question that came in on the question side of things. All right, so due diligence approach for application. Right, so you're voluntarily applying these standards to OHS regulations in Canada and OSHA in the US, right? You need an electrical safety program. And I think people skip over this article and this clause in Z462 that says the employer shall have an electrical safety program. And there's like 2 pages, right? So you need an electrical safety program. Most employers don't. And if you do, your program's not compliant. And that's a whole other discussion and a whole other webinar live streaming, right? Okay, so standards are job and work task based. Again, both of them, they haven't changed on that side of things because it's always what jobs assigned to a worker, what energized work tasks are they going to perform, and the risk assessment procedure. There was another question that came in on the risk assessment procedure. You're doing a job-based risk assessment procedure, and underneath that, you do a shock risk assessment and an arc flash risk assessment, but you're really determining the residual risk level for the job, and the job has discrete work tasks, all right? So then job safety planning shall be documented. And one of the additions was actually an example job safety planning forms in both 70E and Z462, but the examples are different, another divergence. all right? Now, IEEE 1584. This is important because this relates heavily to the arc flash risk assessment in 70 and Z462, right? And what's been going on with it is, and the studies performed by engineers, is we've had, unfortunately, forgive me, misinterpretation and misinformation in the engineering reports, right? And again, we've had hazard risk categories added to results tables. We've had categories added to results tables. We've had level letters added to results tables printed out from the power system software. I keep bringing this up that the power system software vendors included this information and engineers miscommunicated it to their clients, all right? So again, we want to clarify that when you do incident energy analysis using IEEE 1584 or other formulas, you do not have HRC numbers, category numbers, level numbers, or some other invented way of equating the incident energy to some value. It was never technically acceptable to IEEE 1584. And just as a note, what happened is we clarified that in 70 and Z462 with the inclusion of table 130.5G, and in Z462 table 3, 2 arc-rated levels of arc flash PP to be used when you have incident energy analysis. All right, level 1, 1.2 to 12, and level 2 greater than 12. All right, and arc flash suits are available up to 140 calories per centimeter squared ATPV. Next slide, Bhanu. Bhanu?
Yeah, can you say it, Terry?
So interpretation, yeah, you just got to try and keep up with me. So this was the tables, just quickly, that again, this is an important clarification because this is still a problem, right? You know, again, the arc flash hazard incident energy analysis study and report generated by a PE in the US and PNG in Canada should include nothing, no HRCs, no categories. In fact, it should never say dangerous and no PP exists. Those are both not true unless the incident energy is greater than 140.0 calories per centimeter squared.
Okay.
Next slide. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm already there.
There's just a bit of delay, sorry. So the other issue with the reports is the labels that have been produced for the last 10 years. There's a lot of non-compliant labels out there. The information's not correct. Again, it's got categories on it when there's instant energy or level letters. So again, these are just examples of compliant labels.
So do you want to just explain quickly about what are those major things that needs to be identified in those labels, Terry? Just quickly. Take 30 seconds.
Energy. Yeah, incident energy calculated at the working distance and the arc flash boundary, right? And other than that, there should be no information on specific PPE. You should be looking to NFPA 70E or Z462 for arc flash PPE requirements. Do not put the PPE listed on the label. The employer might have bought something completely different. And then the shock side has always been easy, right? Limited, restricted, max voltage, right? And, you know, the use of rubber insulating gloves. So it's the arc flash side that just needs to give the incident energy at the assumed working distance and the arc flash boundary.
And how often?
No information about people.
And how often this has to be done, Terry?
Every 5 years, the study should be reviewed, right? So IEEE 1584 published 2 years ago. So existing studies should be reviewed because of that reason. And again, later on, we'll talk about IEEE 1584 and some of the specific parameters that are of concern that the owner of the electrical equipment needs to control. If you have someone that can ask these questions, which you should, to the engineer, hold the electrical engineer accountable. You need to, and ultimately you should have a technical specification, but most employers have not issued a tech spec to the engineer. And it's a huge issue with all the reports in the last decade, and even since the publishing of the 2018 edition. The other issue is 70E and Z462 now allow, and have allowed, I think for the last 2 editions, that you can put a generic label like what's on the screen and publish results tables. So large industrial supervised sites only, right? And then you don't have to worry about updating hundreds, let alone thousands of labels ever again, because you give the results tables to your electricians, you post it in electrical rooms, or send a PDF to your electrical contractors. There needs to be more communication between electrical contractors and the host. It's not happening. Contractors should be asking for a copy of the study, and in the results tables, they have the information before they show up on the site.
So with that, I think I will take it over to NFPA 2021 edition changes. Because as I mentioned, again, we're not going to touch on every change that's been defined in the document, including the details. We'll pick few things and I will walk you through those details as I look through that. Okay. So the first thing I would like to talk about is there any changes primarily into the definitions, right? So first is the reorganization is not of a huge topic because there are like few sections that's been moved in and out for just to make sure that content is organized in the fashion it's supposed to be for easy understanding and interpretation. So that's been done. So we're not going to talk on specific sections of those, right? So if you look at the definitions page, let me just see if my next slide, I'm moving my slides to, I need to look at two things. So Article 100 definitions, right? So the first thing is there's some definition that's been called out in Balaclava, the wording changes and clarification. So what it needs to be. So basically what it does is instead of just, it calls out arc-rated head protective fabric. That's what the change, and then a small portion of the facial area, not the neck, and the other ones, what has been called out in the previous thing. And also the informational note specifically calls out some balaclavas designed to protect the neck and head area, except the eyes, while others leave the eyes and nose areas unprotected. So that's the one thing. And barrier is the next one thing. There's a minor change to the barrier, right? It's a physical obstruction that's intended to prevent electrically safe work condition. There is a few changes. Temporary state is one of the major things, as Terry has pointed out here. Electrically safe work condition, as you look through that, is not a procedure. So it's not a procedure safe work condition. It is the state wherein all the hazards and conductor circuit parts which a worker might be exposed or maintained in a de-energized state for the purpose of temporarily eliminating. That's the language, right? If you look at that new section or the new wording, there's an informational note that's been added to give you additional clarity for what exactly the paragraph itself means within the electrically safe work condition. And then there is an arc resistant gear. It used to be like just arc resistant. Now the change added equipment as a prefix. So basically, it's an equipment that's been designed to withstand the effects of internal arcing faults and release energy away from the employee, right? So, and also there is a specific informational note 1 and 2, which again takes you to IEEE C3720.7 for testing switchgear up to 52 kV. What the definition of what exactly it needs to be, it has to meet the internal arcing faults. And there is one more thing, informational 2, which talks about Annex O.2.4 for the arc resistant equipment itself. So if you look at all the standards, right, so there's always like the mandatory language which uses shall, and there is a permissive which is like a shall not, and there is all this additional commentary. If you look at a lot of information, good information on this book is in the last pages, which is like in the form of informative annexes. So basically, when you're trying to look at this program, not just only look at what is required in the document itself, please ensure that you go back and read through the informative annexes, because they're taking a lot of work and time in putting that together. That's most important, because the informational annexes gives much more details than the standard itself. Standard gives you the basic levels, but if you want to just dive through the details, you can absolutely go into the informative annexes and get those details prescribed there, right? So fault current available is another change. I think that's, again, if you look at this informational note which talks about the available fault current varies at different locations, right, with the system due to the location of the sources and system impedances, because that's one of the things you need to make sure that is a transformer close by to where you're connected, the system is connected, or is it afar off, and what's the impedance of the transformer for you to take into consideration. That's why they made that additional informational note on that specific section on definitions. Okay, so I'm going to go to next slide. Give me 1 second. I'm just switching between the slides and trying to control a few things here. So field evaluation is the next one. Field evaluation, as you said, is basically they added the notes and additional clarifications to that, right? So and also there is a shock hazard. They added the additional wording of exposed and correlate the definition for the exposed. What exactly is the definition around the shock hazard? They did that. Voltage nominal, they also added the DC battery voltages and NEC correlation. So most of the time, if you look at the 70E, there should be also some callouts specifically to NFPA 70 or NEC, which gives you other criteria for you to go back and look at that, okay? So working on, there's the last one, there's a definition that's a working on, which is basically, there's a wording change, electrical equipment conductors or circuit parts. When you're working on those conductors, that's what the details around it. So just go through and look through those specific details. I mean, definitions are important because now by the way of definitions, you know what exactly the language is defined in the standard itself, and then that will give you the ability to interpret the standards accordingly. So, I mean, it's not like what is not important in the standard. Everything is important, but it requires not just take the bits and pieces as what it applies to you. You also need to look at the complete document to understand why this is called and the way it is called. That's very important as you look through this, okay? So as I'm looking through this, I don't see any other changes. So we're going to skip to Article 110, right? So Article 110 is what is shown in the screen here, which is general requirements for electrical safety related work practices, right? So let's take a quick look at 110. So I'm trying to look at a document here in front of me, an online version, which I'll show it to you after the webinar is done. So that's pretty cool. That's called NFPA link. So if you look at the Article 110, so the major changes is the added hazard elimination in the first one, 110.1, the prioritization. There's informational note, which clearly talks about electrically safe work conditions as a state, where we talked about before the definition of it. That has been added to this. And then the next one is electrically safe work. They added the condition to that, right? So it's not a electrically safe work, it's a work condition that will define what it is. They also added informational annexes to 110.5 electrical safety program, which Terry will talk in depth, I think, in the later slides. But also there's informational note. There is the Annex P, which is called out in the back end of the document. If you want to just look at information on implementing electrical safety program, that gives you a guideline of how it needs to be defined per occupational health and management system, safety management system. So that's the one thing that's been added. And also article on the risk assessment procedure, which is 110.5, one second, I'm just looking at it. It's 110.5H, which is elements of risk assessment procedure. There are two things that's been added, an informational note. So the risk assessment procedure could include identifying when a second person could be required and the training and equipment the person should have. That's the one area they looked at. And the information two, for more information regarding risk assessment, go and refer to Annex F. Annex F, again, talks about the complete risk control hierarchy and risk assessment. Everything has to be done, right? So, and then there is the next section, which is a human error. Human error, it was general before, and then now they changed it to equipment relative to electrical hazards in the workplace, right? So the risk assessment procedure shall address the potential for human error and its negative consequences on people, processes. And the addition was basically, it is only relative to electrical hazards in the workplace, not just to everything, right? So that's one of the things they modified on that from the new standard. The additional thing is, I can see the biggest change here is the new electrical safe work condition policy. So that's a new material. Item K within that item, Article 110.1K, which is electrically safe work condition. It says electrical safety program shall include a safe work condition policy, because the program should define what that safe condition means, and it has to be in compliance with Article 110.3. It's pretty cool. So I think that's change. And then the lockout tagout, they introduced language that's called lockout tagout program, which is the section L, which is electrical safety program shall include a lockout tagout program that has to be in accordance to Article 120.1A, and also the reference to employer's lockout tagout program established in Article 120.1A as well. So those are the two major changes on that. And then I was looking.
Ben,
go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, so just to complement what you're saying, so this is a significant structural change in 70E that was also reflected in Z462, right? So just an FYI, like this is one of the major changes here was shuffling content from, Article 130 to Article 110 so that the content flows more better. It actually makes a lot more sense when you review 70E now and Z462 in clause 4.1 in Z462, which is the equivalent of 110, that it gets the employer organized, right? Because this flow of information now makes a lot more sense if you really understand what 70E and Z462 are trying to do, which is, establish, again, the employer to have some organization, right? So the content was moved from Article 130 and Clause 4.3 right? The 4.1 and 110 as you're describing, right? So, and this is good news for users because it should be easier for them to completely understand what's going on here, right? And then putting emphasis on the electrical safety program, which that content was always there, but it naturally flows that when you're told about, general, priority, establish an electrical safe work condition, justify energized work, then it says you shall have an electrical safety program that documents all of those requirements and more, right? So the missing link with the industry is there's a lack of electrical safety programs or compliant programs, and this is hopefully helping, users clarify this whole thing that, we got to have this upfront policy, right? We turn it off. We can't turn it off. We have to have justification for energized work. That was moved from Article 130, right, where the energized electrical work permit was, and the energized electrical work permit still is in Article 130 or Clause 4.3. So just some sidebar comments that this change is, in my opinion, significant and really cleans up the flow of the content of both 7E and Z462.
Right.
One thing we did different in Z462, another deviation, is we actually created a clause that says you shall have a policy, right? And that's not in 70E. So you should document a policy specifically, right? And again, this is another deviation from Z462. And as I said earlier, the risk assessment procedure, we put normal equipment, operation of normal equipment into the risk assessment where it should be, because those 6 items defining, again, normal equipment operation relate to life of occurrence when the employer does their risk assessment procedure for jobs.
Right. Thanks, Terry. So and also, just talking about that safety program, right? So safety program has to be there, and then that has to be audited again once in 3 years. And then there's a field work audit requirement, which is required mandatory for 1 year, and then the lockout tagout for 1 year as well. So any comments, Terry, you would like to add on those 3 things, what I mentioned?
Nope, that's fine. In elimination of priority, again, electrical safe work condition, so justification, exactly what I just said. It clarifies to the user that this should be what you need to do, because a lot of this was lost later on in Article 130. All right, so this reorganizational, this restructuring and movement of articles and clauses, if you really understand and are using 70, you should go, now this flow of information makes total sense, a lot more sense actually. And then, like I said, the electrical safety program piece, right after that is where the employer needs to go.
Right? Absolutely correct.
Have a compliant electrical safety program. So, yeah.
So electrical safety program, again, it's a 110.5, which talks about it, and where there was some minor modifications to referring to Annex P for information implementing a safety program. That's been called out, and also elements of risk assessment procedure. So that's one of the things that they talk about, the risk assessment procedure, which is 110.5H. The electrical safety program shall include the risk assessment procedure, where they have these 2 additional things. The procedure could include identifying a second person, as I talked about before. That's one of the things. And then human error is one thing. Human error is where you do this assessment taking into fact an equipment related to the electrical hazard in the workplace. So that's 2 major things, what I see on that. Additional retraining we talked about, which requires additional retraining and training and retraining. That language has been changed from just retraining, and how often that is to be done is all spelled out in the 110.6. So testing is one of the things that's 110.8, which will talk about only qualified persons shall perform tasks such as testing, troubleshooting, and voltage measuring electrical equipment, where an electrical hazard exists. That's what one of the changes they added, because that's where you have the qualified person and testing, and you just put two and two together. So where the electrical hazard has been exists, you need to make sure the qualified person is the one who is performing that voltage testing or absence of voltage testing, which we'll talk about it. And then 110.9, there was a minor change to cord and plug connected test instruments and cords. Before there was a change in the language. That's one of the areas. And then they also included, instead of just a conductive locations, they also added the wet locations. So portable cord and plug connected electric equipment used in accordance in conductive or wet work location should also be approved for use in those locations. So the change is basically going from just a conductive to wet locations. Okay. So that's last one is equipment used. 110.12, as I'm just looking through that, equipment shall be used in accordance to manufacturer's instructions. So this is completely a new thing that's been added to the standard, which is 110.12, which clearly tells you can't just use the equipment as you deem fit or necessary. You need to follow the manufacturer's instructions that's been supplied with that specific piece of equipment as you try to implement that. That's very important because those equipment have been listed and labeled to certain criteria, and you need to make sure that you're using that piece of equipment in accordance to manufacturer's instructions. If you don't have the manufacturer instructions, then you can go to industry consensus standards. For example, if you're using a piece of switchgear and that's like 3 decades or 4 decades old, and you don't have any kind of information or the background on that equipment or the manufacturer, if it is the imported item, so you can definitely look through what the recommendation for that type of equipment using NFPA 70B standards or ANSI, NETA, MTS, if it is electrical equipment. Any additional thoughts on that, Terry?
I don't think you're advancing your slides. Just make sure you're advancing your slides. I think there's a question came in that the slides aren't being advanced with the content. So again, no, keep going, and then we'll get to the Z462 slides, and then I can overlay some of the comments here again with respect to what you're identifying in 70E. And we are getting some good questions coming in, right, too, as well. So just keep going here, but just make sure you. I know I do this often too. You're talking, but you got to advance your slides. Awesome.
Okay. Sorry. Then the next chapter is 70, which talks about the establishing electrically safe work condition. This is exactly one of the areas where Grace plays with the permanent electrical safety devices. That's not the part of discussion today. But the biggest thing here is lockout tagout principles. As I look at it, they added the sentence: the procedure shall meet the requirements of applicable codes, standards, and regulations, right? So that's one of the major things, because then you can tie that back into 1910, 147, lockout tagout and the application of that. And then also on the lockout tagout device, there's a change that's been added, as you see the slide here. The one thing that's italicized, provided that all the following conditions exist. So all these 3 bullets, what you see, only one circuit or piece of equipment is de-energized, the lockout period does not extend beyond the work shift, an employee is exposed to the hazards associated with re-energizing the circuit or equipment, or familiar with the procedure. So this ABC, these 3 things what I'm showing on the slide right now, it's very important. That's part of the new 2021 edition changes, okay? So next is Article 120 again, we're in the same section, which talks about lockout tagout procedures, elements of control, stored energy. There was a new note added for reference to the capacitor content, because the capacitor content has been added completely new to this specific section. There is like annex or that talks about the entirely new annex, which Terry will talk in detail as we go through that specific areas of discussion. And then that's been added to that. And also Article 360 talks completely about safety-related requirements for capacitors. I think there's one gentleman who has put a lot of work into it at the time. I think I talked to him on the capacitors, and all the research work has been done on that. And that's how that led to including that specific section within the standard itself, because that was not even identified in the previous editions. Okay. So the next one is establishing electrically safe work condition. This is place where you have this absence of voltage testing, you have this 8-step process. You need to make sure that the systems are de-energized or put in electrically safe work condition. That's one of the things, again, where Grace plays a significant role using the permanent electrical safety devices. I'm not going to talk about all the things here. So if you look at the process, it's an 8-step process, right? So where you look at the step 5, the change the language from previous release of stored energy. Now it's block or relieve stored non-electrical energy in devices to the extent the circuit parts cannot be unintentionally energized by such devices. That's the change. The entire step 5 has been reworded. And then on the step 7, right? Step 7, it's a live test for absence of voltage test. So instead of test for de-energized state, previous editions called out test for de-energized state. That's been changed to test for absence of voltage. So that step in the process is called testing for absence of voltage, and basically a language that's been changed from de-energized state to test for absence of voltage. And then there is exception 1 to 7. Before it was just exception 1 there. Now they made sure that the one that follows that step 7 has exception number 1 that is specific to that step 7 alone, not for the entire all the 7 steps. Okay, so there also they just made change to permanently mounted tester to absence of voltage tester. Basically, it was like a permanently mounted device. They changed it to absence of voltage tester to make sure there is a difference between testing and a tester. Testing is like a process or a procedure, and the tester is like all-encompassing single device. So what we tell our products, Grace Technologies does is step 7, which is using an adequately portable test instrument, and we have devices that will verify the absence of voltage testing. Okay, so I want to just advance the slide before I forget. Yeah, I'm sorry, Terry.
You're not advancing your slides, just people are commenting to get advance your slides.
Okay, so this is what the wording change I was talking about. So delete the verified is de-energized to verify absence of voltage. And then this is specifically the section which we talk about exception 1 to 7, not just exception 7 alone. Okay, so that's kind of major changes. And these are the devices we talk about from Grace. So for verifying absence of voltage testing, which is this one, voltage test station, you can verify safely from outside the door, and also have the voltage presence indicators for verifying the de-energized state through a visual voltage presence only. So we have voltage presence and voltage absence of testing, 2 product categories. If you want to learn more, just take the exit survey and just show your interest, and we'll definitely be more than happy to connect with you on how these products will help you to comply with the standards. Okay, so Article 130. So this is what I want Terry to cover on, because Article 130 has a lot of changes, and then mostly it's about dealing with electrical hazards, so energized electrical work permits. I'm sure Terry has a lot of experience, and he can talk for the rest of the day if you want him to talk about the 130 section. So with that, I'm going to have Terry to lead that conversation. Terry, go ahead, Terry.
Okay, so really Article 130 is clause 4.3 in Z462, and I want to make sure I keep, giving that overlay between the 2 standards. So this comes back to what Bhanu has been presenting, is that we had this structural reorganization occur where a lot of Article 130 content was moved to Article 110, and we did that in Z462 as well. We moved clause 4.3 content to clause 4.1, and we did make some changes, though. There's some deviations and slight differences there, again, where we've broken out that there needs to be a policy with respect to energized electrical work and establishing electrical safe work condition first. But the changes now wiped out all the front-end content in Article 130, and purely it just has an organizational sort of general content introduction, and then it gets right into the energized electrical work permit. Now, the energized electrical work permit, it's the same in Z462 to 70, and there was really no changes, but I just want to comment that the energized electrical work permit is completely misunderstood, misapplied wherever I go, right? And so a heads up on that, again, that the energized electrical work permit is not required for all energized electrical work. There's exemptions, all right? So after the permit, we get into the shock risk assessment and the arc flash risk assessment. Technically harmonized, process harmonized between Z462 and 70E, and for arc flash risk assessment, table 130.5C and table 2, I think they're the same. Yeah, they are. And there was one work task that was added related to first energization of a circuit breaker or re-energizing a circuit breaker after significant maintenance, and that the likely occurrence of an abnormal arcing fault is yes. So basically, they're harmonized still, but it's major cleanup, right? And very focused. If you need the permit, yes or no, the exemptions, then move into the shock risk assessment and the arc flash risk assessment. And again, this is where we start to diverge, is on the arc flash risk assessment. And if you do not have incident energy analysis completed, you have method 2, the arc flash PB category method. All right, so Ben, can you just advance the slide and see where we go here? So basically, as well, I've been tracking some of the questions, and I just want to make sure that I answer a few as we go. But some comment came back about, well, can't we still use the 012 or the 015 version of 70E? No. As soon as a new version of 70 or Z462 published, the previous editions are obsolete. So that's another problem. You need to keep current with your policies, practice, procedural requirements based on the latest edition. Once when a new one publishes, the other one's obsolete, right? So you got to move on. You got to move on and change. The other thing too is, and I'm going to talk about this later, is blast pressure in the 40 cal myth, because I said that there's problems with the reports, and the report said 40 cal is dangerous, no BP exists. This relates to the arc flash risk assessment piece. That was misinformation, completely technically miscommunicated for the last decade, right? And there's been significant clarification even in 70E, right, that arc flash pressure is not what it's been made out to be.
Yeah.
So you can work at greater than 40 calories, and if you do a risk assessment procedure, right, for jobs, you could work up to 140 calories because the pressure could be the same or could be different or higher or lower depending on the incident energy. And you use risk assessment as a tool, right, for the arc flash risk assessment piece. All right, so basically the permit, again, it may not be required. Like 90% of the time it's not. And it's really repair and alteration that we want to eliminate. And if you do have justification, then you can use the energized electrical work permit, right? But you have to have solid justification. You have to be able to defend it, right? So again, misunderstanding about the permit, we need it all the time. Well, technically you do, unless it's exempted, but there's exemptions. And then you can add additional exemptions in your company's electrical safety program, right? These are voluntary standards. Interpret them, figure out how to apply them in a reasonable manner that's practicable in the workplace. So take additional exemptions and add it to your company's electrical safety program. All right, so again, the arc flash and shock risk assessments, again, I hope those are being interpreted properly because they're true risk assessments. 3 steps. Work task, am I exposed to shock? What's the potential injury or damage to health to me? And what's the likelihood of occurrence? And that's the risk assessment right there that you're doing. You're using both of those to blend them and make a decision on the residual risk level. And you determine additional protective measures. And if you're using the latest editions of Z462 and 70, you got to talk the language, right? You've got to train your workers and make sure the training's compliant and that you change the language because the wording and terminology's changed. That's another thing that's changed with these standards. The wording and terminology's changed. So additional protective measures are the outcome of a work task shock risk assessment and arc flash risk assessment.
So Terry, before you
Yeah.
go to that, there's one section that's been added. I think I was just looking through that standard. So there is one section under 130.4 shock risk assessment that's called estimate of likelihood and severity. That's been added new content, which talks about while estimating the likelihood, you need to take into consideration the design of the electrical equipment and the equipment operating condition and condition of maintenance of. As Terry mentioned before, if you do some servicing to a gear and try to put it back, you need to take that risk into consideration. Is that right, Terry?
So the condition of maintenance was included in the arc flash risk assessment. So thanks for identifying that, but it was added to shock risk assessment as well. So the condition of maintenance is a parameter of risk assessment related to likelihood of occurrence, right? So again, condition of maintenance does impact exposure to shock, and more specifically and critically to the arc flash risk assessment that the qualified person performs. So I want to clarify, the shock risk assessment and the arc flash risk assessment are performed by the qualified person, not by the supervisor or the manager or the electrical safety committee. The manager and supervisor and electrical safety committee perform the overall risk assessment procedure for jobs and identify work tasks and then individually determine the residual risk level for the work tasks. And condition of maintenance is one of the parameters you need to consider when completing your risk assessment related to the likelihood of occurrence. All right, so again, incident analysis method added to clarify outerwear. Oh, so this was an interesting one too. So again, if you're immersed in this, great, but a lot of public comments come back that are beneficial. And again, I encourage you, a lot of the questions coming in saying, well, can't we change the name of the limiter approach boundary to qualified electrical worker boundary? Put a submission in, public comment, and ask for that change, right? So again, this clarification on PP and outerwear. So now we're determining our arc flash PP. The question was, well, what about outerwear? I'm working outside and it's raining, well, yeah, you might have undergarments that are arc flash PP under the rainwear, but the rainwear needs to be arc rated. But your clothing underneath, your everyday wear or underneath that, you need to make that the actual ATPP you need for the incident energy, and the outerwear needs to be arc rated, but it won't be part of what you use as identifying that you have the right arc flash PP on. There's another issue there, which is, again, if you don't have the outerwear, right, like this rain jacket, tested in the lab with the clothing you have underneath, which could be an arc rated coverall, you can't add the ATPVs, right? So you need to wear clothing that's greater than or equal to the incident energy. And if you wear an outer garment for weather, as an example, it needs to be arc rated, but we aren't relying on that ATPV because you cannot establish a total system arc rating unless you get the rainwear into fabric or whatever that is. It's made to make the jacket or in the pants tested in the lab, right? So that's just another comment. All right. So Let's see, article, general note on guidance with respect to arc-ready clothing, maximum use voltage rubber insulating gloves and barriers and new material. All right, so just back to 130, because this is where I'm going to get into the arc flash PP category method and Z462. So that's an alternate method, and it's valid, right? It always has been valid, but I think it's been potentially misapplied, and that's where the engineers added HRCs and categories and level letters. You can't commingle the two methods, and we clarified that in the last edition and the last edition of 70. You can't mix the methods, one or the other, on the same electrical equipment, not both. All right, not both. All right, so rubber insulating gloves, max use voltage. What was added is, again, for clarity, again, this was done in ASTM standard, but people that didn't maybe have the ASTM standard, it costs money. So we added a new table in 70E and Z462 table 130.7 C7A, which is, again, the class numbers and the max use voltages. Ben, can you advance the slide?
You see the Terry?
So then this table was added. Yeah, the table was added to clarify, right, that. So again, Ben, just go to the next slide. So again, test instruments, article 130 involving electrical hazards, non-contact presence, test instrument, observe visible. Oh, right. So this one's interesting, right? So people are going, well, what if the incident energy is this number and I don't have enough arc flash PP for it? So this was added to clarify. So basically, use risk assessment if the incident energy value is greater than the available arc flash PP that you have, and sort of 4 options were provided. And this would be applying the hierarchy of risk control methods, right, at the end of the day, right? So it says if you have to reduce risk, use a non-contact proximity test instrument to test, right, the secondary side of the transformer for absence, or, right, observe visible disconnect, or increase the working distance, which drives down the incident energy, or consider system design options to reduce incident energy. The challenge is substitution and engineering safety by design or prevention through design don't happen overnight. So when companies started these studies, they didn't have specifications and they didn't have sort of a long-term perspective. And then I think there was a lot of panic when the report comes back, it says dangerous, no PP exists, which was the 40 cal myth. And then what do we do? And the engineer would say, well, we can do incident energy reduction, but it's going to take time and money, right? So if the incident energy is greater than available arc flash PP, you have to make some decisions and use the risk assessment procedure as a tool at that point. Because what you're happening is you're moving to high risk because the potential injury or damage to health is no longer valid, right? It's 160 calories and I only have a 140 cal suit. The worker's not adequately protected, so here's some suggestions that were added on how you could manage that, right? But you have to then specifically look at it, and your electrical safety program is where you can also document these requirements or these what you're going to do if the incident energy is greater than available arc flash PP. But like I said, industry stopped at 40 a decade ago, and it was wrong. It was miscommunicated to you. I encourage you to look at arc flash suits at 75, 100, 140 cals. Another comment came in and said, well, and a question came in and said, NFPA told us that PP won't protect us. It won't protect us. And well, phone the PP vendors, get the information. Do not trust an instructor in training all the time. You have to interpret what it's right. So if you were told by NFPA or someone else that wearing a 100 cal or 140 cal suit is dangerous, it's not going to protect you because the blast pressure is going to be high, it was false. So, and if you want to talk about this one, I'll gladly. For a decade, I've been telling everybody arc blast pressure is not what it's been made out to be. So
Terry, I want to just make a quick comment, right? So I was in NFPA training last week on 70E, the new standards, and then there was this topic, right? So the people think there is, when it comes to PPE, there is only 2. One is a 12 cal, one is a 40 cal. There's nothing in between. There's nothing over.
That was because the hazard risk category said min 40, but the words minimum. And then the arc flash PP vendors flogged HRC 2 and 4 kits and unfortunately boxed the industry in. And risk assessment, if you do a risk assessment for a job, a discrete work task where the work is exposed to arc flash, you can use up to 140 calorie per centimeter squared arc thermal performance value arc flash suit, completely valid. An 8.7 calorie coverall provides the same arc thermal performance value performance as a 140 cal arc flash suit, which is 50% probability of the onset of a secondary burn injury. The blast pressure might be higher at 8 calories or higher at 140. There's other factors, which is coming up on the slide. So Ben, if you can just advance the slide, and we'll keep moving here.
Yep. Sorry. So now we go to chapter 2.
So as far as chapter 2, there was really no changes in 70E related to chapter 2, safety-related maintenance requirements. And again, in chapter 3, this is where there's 2 significant changes that were made, which is batteries and a new electrical hazard identification flowchart for work on batteries was added to Annex F. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Advance the slide. And then one of the most significant technical changes that occurred in 70 that we do not have in Z462, unfortunately. This is the other reason why Canadian users of Z462 need to buy 70E. This capacitor content is phenomenal. And it was added based on an IEEE electrical safety workshop paper put forward and then put into a public comment. And again, another topic that we didn't cover off effectively, capacitors, right? And huge energy, and the energy is different as it comes out of a capacitor that we get an abnormal condition on. So again, laboratory research, Annex R, an amazing detailed technical review of electrical hazards and capacitors. So Z462 users, you need to buy 70E to get this capacitor content. All right, so advance the slide, Bhanu. And again, 70E and Z462, and I'm the Annexes working group for CSA Z462's tech committee. So again, there's not been as many changes in 70 annexes as Z462. So Annex D, all of the formulas were deleted for 1584. They should have never been there. You need to buy IEEE 1584 from the IEEE. If you're an engineer completing the studies, you need to own a copy of that standard. It's $800 US, but you should have a copy if you're performing these calculations. Forgive me, the software manuals are wonderful, but you need to have IEEE 1584. You need to buy it. It gives you the basis for actually what you're putting in your report for interpretation, right? And you need to be able to quote it, right? So Annex D, all the formulas were deleted. The risk assessment and risk control F added the battery, electrical hazard battery flow chart. A job safety planning checklist example was added in both 70E and Z462. And then the layering discussion I had earlier, right? The composite layering, this total system rating, that was some minor updates in M. Incident reduction methods, there was some major cleanup in there. There was one new add, but we in Canada actually, we did a major rewrite of Annex O. So again, there's benefits for you to buy both and have both. Again, these are voluntary standards. OSHA will tell you, what did you do? Well, we used every available standard on the planet, right? Every available standard. We got one from Europe, we got one from Australia, right? And we took the best of all of them and applied them as due diligence. And that's what standards are, is toolboxes. Get as many of these toolboxes you can, interpret them, apply the information reasonably and practically, and you're going to get the best due diligence. So go ahead.
No, before you skip that, the layers of testing, right? So on the PPE, we talked about just before this, we started the webinar. So, I mean, you can't have like a different manufacturers done together. Makes sense? So basically, you can't have like a Vestex and then you can have like another one as a layered. You need to have that only as a tested together.
From the beginning, you weren't supposed to, right? From the beginning, again, you're never supposed to have different manufacturers layered and add the ATPVs. You have to go to the Kinectrics lab, which is where all this PP is for North America, and you have to take the Nomex and you have to take the Westex, and no one's going to do that. Why would DuPont take a Westex product and test it? So you can't have dissimilar manufacturers' fabrics layered and add the ATPVs. In order to get a total system mark rating, they have to be lab tested and never happen. Right? So be very careful if you are using layering, but most of it industry isn't. Most of what industry's done is gone with a single layer, coverall, a shirt or pant, and then you go right to an arc flash suit, which again was emphasized with the addition of table 130.5G, right? Keep it in the end table 3, right? So basically, yeah, total system arc rating, it should be managed by you if you just buy everyday wear and an arc flash suit. And an arc flash suit is a tested multi-layer system, either the bib overalls, the jacket, and the hood by the manufacturer of those arc flash suits, all right? And then ISO 45001 was referenced. So ANSI Z10, right, is the US's occupational health and safety management system standard. So if you are your company's electrical safety program manager, you should have ANSI Z10, and I'd encourage you to get 45001. you need to have these standards in order to be able to apply them, in my opinion. Oh, we're using 45001, but we don't even have a copy, right? We're using ANSI Z10 to help build our electrical safety program, but we don't have a copy. I'm doing the calculations, but I don't even have IEEE 1584. And IEEE 1584.1, which I'm going to mention later, I'd say 90% of the electrical engineers doing the studies don't even know that that complementary standard to 1584 exists, and it'll allow you to do a QA/QC check and audit of your report. And then you can tell the client your report's compliant to 1584.1. I'm very critical, and I can be, because I've reviewed these engineering reports across Canada, some from the US, and the quality of these reports. Any electrical engineer that's watching this, you've got to make some changes, right? The quality of what we're pumping out for reports is actually not reflecting very well on our profession. So some FYI there. And Annex R is the new annex on capacitors. That's an amazing annex on capacitors where you do have large capacitors in use. And then this is the battery flow chart, UPS battery flow chart from Annex F. Again, electrical hazards and associated work on batteries. Great document, great tool. UPS systems and batteries. A lot of work needs to be done here still on identifying DC arcing fault sustainability and the voltage level, again, control versus power. Next slide.
All right, with that, I think we go to Z462, Terry.
Right. So now I'll be able to layer over these things that Ben has been talking about. But basically, we have content harmonization, but we have deviated now in Z462. Like I said, in clause 4.1 or Article 110, we've got some changes. We are not 100% aligned with 70E. Right. Again, we put a specific policy clause. We included the electrical equipment condition underneath risk assessment procedure, which is where it should be. Right. And that's because that's a life of occurrence evaluation requirement. Right. So significant reorganization like 70E, but we didn't do everything the same as 70E this time around. Right. For many reasons. Right. So we are deviating in the organization of the standard with some of the clauses that aren't matching the articles. And again, the changes, again, it says the changes align with the priority to eliminate exposure, energized work must be justified, and develop and implement a program. That's very clear now in both Article 110 and Clause 4.1, all right? But I said we added that electrical safety policy in Clause 4.1.5 that's not in 70E. And the policy should be right at the front end of your electrical safety program, purpose, principles, and scope, and you need to state policy. You need to state policy, all right? And then we've got Table 2, which has a new work task. Sorry. A new work task for circuit breaker, first-time energization. So again, Clause 4.2 and Article 120, there wasn't a lot of change, right? So not much to talk about there. The process for verifying and establishing electrically safe work condition had some changes that Bhanu touched on, right? But other than that, Clause 4.1, major reorganizational change from Clause, Clause 4.3 and Z462. Excuse me. And again, the task table. Right, we added that one new task, and a couple of tasks I think were deleted. So you need to take a close look at Table 2 in Z462 or Table 130.5C in NFPA 70. Next slide. So this is what I want to spend a few minutes on. This is the most significant technical divergence of Z462 to 70E. And if you're a 70 user, this should open your eyes and go, what? So what happened is we had the ability with the CSA Z462 Tech Committee to take IEEE 1584, the 2018 edition, and consider it. But the public comments had closed, and the process that Bhanu just reviewed, this is very strictly followed, and it should be. Yeah. So IEEE 1584, the second edition, published in November 2018, and there was no ability for public comments to be then submitted. And you can't change a public comment and deviate from it, right? You really can't. So we had the ability, and we took a look at the new 1584, which has significant new formulas. The parameters, some of them are the same. There's some new parameters that have to be very carefully reviewed and should be reviewed with the owner of the electrical equipment by the consulting engineer so the owner understands. Again, this comes back to my comments about the quality of engineering reports, both in Canada and the US, where the engineer needs to now make sure they explicitly communicate with the owner on what they're doing, how they're selecting parameters. So what we did in Z462 is we have a whole bunch of engineers on our tech committee, consulting or utility engineers, and they said, well, hey, we're going to take a look at the parameters in Table 6A, which is the equivalent of table 130.7C15A and 70E. And we're going to redo the calculations and see if these ARC class PP categories are still accurate, right? So again, and conservatively established in the parameter selection, for every piece of electrical equipment except for 600 volt class switchgear, the incident energy calculations came out lower than the ARC class PP category, ARC class PP minimum, right? Which is ARC class category 1 min 4 cals, 2 min 8, 3 min 25, and 4 min 40. But when you do the switchgear with those parameters, I think we got 72 or 73 calories, and 70 you can go, what? We currently have a category 4 on that. That says min 40. Canada reevaluated it, and it says that 72 calories, and that we need a new category. So yeah, you do, right? So, but this won't be addressed until the 2024 edition of NFPA 70E, right? So we were able to address it, and now we have minimum 75 calories per centimeter squared, ARC flash suit, ARC thermal performance value. If you're racking it out of power circuit breaker on low voltage switchgear, 40 or 600 volts, you make those parameters, you meet those, you need 75 calorie PPE. So this is a significant technical deviation, significant for 70 users.
Category 5 doesn't exist. Yeah.
What's that?
No, I said category 5 doesn't exist in 70E right now. Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
It doesn't exist in table 130.7C15C,
Yep.
right? C15C, did I get that right? And so it doesn't. So, and again, you might want to, as a user of NFPA 70E, put a question in, right? And you need to put public comment. Bhanu said public comments are open. So you need to add that public comment. Do we need a 75 calorie ARC class category 5 and 70E based on the new IEEE 1584? And there's probably going to be 10 or 20 or 30 public comments, hopefully, and the 70 Tech Committee will review that. So this is the first thing we did. So this is our table 6A. So our tables are 6A, 6B, and 6C. So table 6A for AC electrical equipment now shows an ARC class category 5. In table 6C, we then further identified what that is as minimum 75 calories per centimeter squared ARC thermal performance value. It's an ARC class 2, basically. And these are readily available from multiple vendors out there in Canada and the US. All right, yep. So again, this is significant. As I just said, this slide sort of highlighting what we ended up doing. We struck a subcommittee within our tech committee, and a couple of the engineers, 2 or 3 of them, went off and did the calculations with the available software that they had, and came back and said, well, we've got a problem and we need to add that category. So we did. As well, what happened is several of the people on the working group said, well, why don't we create a new table that's easier for the qualified person to use? And I'm all for that, right? You don't have to get a fault current calculation or have a lookup table. So what came back was some options for a new table. This is another significant technical deviation. So related to the ARC class category method now in Canada, we have 2 tables for AC electrical equipment that can be used, and both are normative. So both are valid, but you need to select which one to use. So I sponsor that we still use today. This new table V1 can be used. And again, I do like it, but as a user in Canada, you're gonna have to decide, right? You could use 6A or V1 or, and decide what to do. But I'm gonna highlight a significant technical problem with the table V1 that's coming up next, all right? So again, all the qualified person has to do with this new table V1 is check the nameplate data for the transformer, the circuit breaker, or the fuse, and then depending on the voltage and the electrical protective device, you might have to check the settings, right? The settings on the circuit breaker or the relay to use the new table V1. Next slide, Ben. So this table V1 that was added, again, this came out of our working group, was we revalidated the underlying incident energy calculations for the categories in table 6A, which is table 130.7C15A and 70E. And this new idea came up, and I like the concept, right? Yeah, great. I've got a 100 amp breaker at 2.8 volts, and I need ARC class category 2. That's all the electrician will have to do, and I'll show you an excerpt coming up. But what happened is it added 240 volt single phase electrical equipment. So this is the clause 437.315. Yeah, 5-digit clause in Z462. The ARC class category method recognizes this table V1 now, right? And it goes, note, the purpose of table V1 is to simplify the information gathering required to use the table. So the intent was valid, I love it, right? But what happened is is what was brought forward, and if you can advance to the next slide, Bhanu, was including 240-volt single-phase electrical equipment, right? And I'm gonna tell you, I didn't support this. I did not support this at all, but it published in Z462, so it sets a precedence that needs to be questioned, right? So what this new table did, and this is the only place in Z462 that 240-volt single-phase is indicated by this table, implying that we can sustain a single-phase 240-volt abnormal arcing fault creating arc flash. And I'm personally, as a professional engineer in Canada, disclaiming that and not supporting it. And I didn't support it. There's no technical substantiation, right? IEEE 1584 has a soft interpretation that says you could use the formulas for single-phase, but it'll yield conservative outcome. But the first thing that IEEE 1584 says, it only applies to 280-volt three-phase to 15 kV three-phase.
Not a single phase.
Right, so in my opinion, we never should have had that additional content in 1584, right? And I can't remember because I'm a voting member if I asked to get that deleted, but it's included. So this comes down to good engineering practice and technical interpretation of standards and not being conservative, which isn't good engineering. So unfortunately, in Z462, listen to me, we have this new table that implies that 240-volt single-phase can sustain an abnormal arcing fault and be an arc flash hazard. Every panel board in every house or every location on the planet is now an arc flash hazard. There's no technical substantiation. So I'm disclaiming this personally as a professional engineer in Canada in 5 provinces that I will not sponsor this. And there was no valid, and in fact, it's a tech committee and others voted to accept it, right? I voted to reject it, right? So this is in there. Be careful. Again, we'll go back to slide 10. Just go back, please, because I wanted to point out what I do like about the new table, right? Is the upstream device at same voltage in separate compartment node, and the transformer, the fuses, and the circuit breakers. You just have to have the nameplate. So the electrician just says, I've got a transformer servicing this 280-volt panel board, because right below this is 280-volt three-phase, right? And that transformer is X, right, kVA, and then poof, I go across, and then I select arc flash category 2, minimum 8 calorie clothing. But you'll notice for the single phase, if the transformer, right, is between 75 and 250 kVA, it says we need an arc flash suit to work on a panel board. 120 single phase, 240 single phase. And if you actually poll every electrician in North America, which will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, they're going to tell you they've never experienced an arc flash on a 120, 240-volt single-phase panel board. Arcing faults, yes. The melting of the screwdriver shaft before they taped it up with electrician's tape because they didn't want to buy expensive insulated hand tools, right? But there's been no arc flashes. So go to the next slide, which is the DOE has an industry, within the DOE they have a group. And again, I wanted to check.
Energy Facility Contractors Group.
Right, there it is, Energy Facilities Contractors Group. So these are all the DOA labs. So this is a very cool website. There's lots of free content on here. Go there and check out some of the stuff that they have. They have some guidelines and documents like this one, FPA Best Practice 232-2019, low voltage 208, 120, and 240-volt AC arcing sustainability, but 240-volt three-phase. And then on the right, again, you need the whole paper. Download it, search it. It's public domain. They want you to have this. And I love the FCOG because they attend the IEEE, and we have some significant contributions specifically from Lloyd Gordon and others now over the last 5 years plus at the IEEE Safe Workshop. And I'm glad they're sharing. These are people that are electrical engineers, masters, PhD folks, and they're playing around with things to invent things, and they're bringing that knowledge to us. And these papers they have are 100% credible. If there's anything I trust something coming from these DOE labs, right? So they say that you can't sustain a single phase arc flash, and that for 280-volt three-phase, you need specific, particular, right, situations to occur to even sustain 280-volt three-phase. But 240-volt single phase, no arcing fault can be sustained, creating an arc flash. And again, this paper substantiates that from a credible organization, right? So again, significant technical deviation. And the next slide. Between Z462 and 70E. Now this is the other area where we have a lot of deviation. We always have with the annexes in Z462. So we rewrote Annex A, and because CSA adopted ISO 45001 as CSA Z45001, this is an amazing annex because it shows how an occupational health and safety management system and the requirements for an overall safety manual or safety program, and how Z462 completely aligns and can be applied against that in a developed electrical safety program. Same thing for Annex D. We wiped out all the IEEE 1584 formulas and we just point to it. Annex I, we have our own version of the job safety planning form. It's different than the one that's in Annex I of 70E. And Annex K, we did significant updates, and I don't think 70E included these. Like we had significant, well, no, actually it did. There's significant updates about blast pressure. So if you want to find out why blast pressure is not the concern that it was made out to be, check Annex K and 70E and Z462. And if you want to talk about it, give me a call. Next slide. Next slide, Ben.
Yes, sir. Yep, it's a lag.
So Annex O, again, safety-related design requirements. We did a complete rewrite on this in Z462 that's not in 70E. And we have some new annexes for high voltage or low voltage switching and isolation, Annex P. Annex Q, you don't have that in 70E. It's a complete annex on arc flash and shock equipment labels, and it shows you a compliant label, similar to the labels that I showed. You don't have that in 70E. That's why I encourage 70 users to buy Z462. There's some really good content that'll help you understand and interpret. And again, like I said earlier, OSHA, any standard you bring forward, and it's not the standard, it's how you adapt it into your company's electrical safety program and increase your due diligence, right, to OSHA's regulations or OHS regulations for Canada. Annex T is a new annex in Z462, not in 70E. It's about 4 or 5 pages talking about temporary protected grounds, right? Specifying them, where to use them, where not to use them, a really good annex as well. And then the new Annex B, not in 70E, is the alternate arc flash PP category table V1, all right, table V1, and I just went through that very briefly, all right? So again, this last slide, again, new table V1, alternate to table 6A, and this is where I basically on the slide you'll see it. The 240 volt single phase electrical equipment arcing fault sustainable is implied through table V1 and that electrical equipment being included. And again, we also used in table V1 the new arc flash category 5, which equates again to the switchgear, the low voltage switchgear piece, and the new minimum 75 calories per centimeter squared ATV arc flash chute. Now moving on, because I'm looking at the clock and we got to keep moving, right? IEEE 1584 2018 edition. Again, you need to understand the changes and you need to control them as the owner. You need to question the electrical engineer that's doing the study for you. You need to hold them accountable for the parameter selection and their rationalization for the parameter selection. Because if you don't, incident energy can go up to 200% if they use the horizontal conductor box electrode configuration, right? So now we need to look at work tests performed on switchgear and where the HCB box electrode configuration may apply. I'm just giving you the Coles notes here quick, but as the owner of the electrical equipment, you need to hold the engineer accountable for more substantiation and clarification of parameter selection in their report that they issue you, and you need to ask questions and hold them accountable and make sure they're not conservative or that they don't misapply the parameters, all right? So incident energy calculations can go up and incident energy calculations can go down slightly, all right? So the VCB and the VCBB box electrode configurations, well, and VCBB is new. It's a new box electrode configuration in the 018 edition of 1584, right? Again, they yield calculations that could be lower than the old VCBB, but VCBB will be potentially slightly higher, right? So as well on this slide, IEEE 1584.1, I'm telling you, when I ask engineers in Canada, and I guarantee it's the same in the US, they don't know 1584.1 exists. Buy 1584.1 and use it to audit your report. You're gonna go, whoa, I don't have that in my report, I don't have that in my report. And then you can tell your clients that your report complies with 1584.1, which is a good thing, right? And better, quality report for your clients. So again, 1584 significant changes, buy 1584.1, audit your reports, update your report, your template report, and how you present that to the client. I guarantee you will improve your report if you buy 1584.1. Next slide. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key parameter changes in these next slides, right? So new formulas, and again, I encourage, and I don't, even if you have to hire someone to write you a technical specification because you don't have an electrical engineer on staff, get a technical specification and leverage that so you can control the cost and the quality of the studies that have been provided to you. This is out of control in North America, probably in the world where these studies are being done. The owner doesn't have an electrical engineer. There's no one to write the spec. Hire an engineer to write the spec and take control of your studies. Again, you control what the parameter selection will be. You control the modes of operation. You control the equipment label that's put forward. And again, the quality of the report, you can hold the engineer accountable. right? And again, I'm an electrical engineer, professional engineer in Canada, and I'm criticizing my profession because I have the right to. And again, any engineers on this webinar, you need to take a look at your reports and up the ante. We need better quality reports here and better information to provide industry. So here's a summary, and I'm not going to go through all of it. Again, these are some of the things that need to be considered and the impact on instant energy. System modes of operation. The 2-second guideline is still there and should be used, but it needs to be, in the report, advised why it's being used. The conductor gap, right? That didn't change, it's still there. The box correction factor, right? So this was some changes to the box size, right? The box size correction factor, and then the box electrode configuration, right? So some of these were already there, but some new parameters were added under the box electrode configuration, or again, the way that the formulas are used to calculate this. But I'll make a statement. The biggest impact on incident energy is the box electrode configuration, right? And again, all of a sudden, I got to go the tape measure and do all sorts of measurements for gaps and everything. No, the engineer should not be telling you they need to spend 100 hours on your site with a tape measure, because you won't be able to open the equipment anyway. It's energized. The use of typical data is a valid engineering assumption with respect to many of these parameters. We do not need to have engineers or electricians going out measuring gaps. Get engineering drawings that are available, or make assumptions, and that's a valid engineering calculation, methodology. Our next slide. Next slide.
Yes,
Better?
sure. Yep.
And then this is just a summary of the difference in the box electrode configurations between the 2002 and the 2018 edition. Next slide. Again, this is a more explicit. Whoops, Benny, you went too fast. You went 2 slides ahead. So this is, again, a table that I drafted that explains these box electrode configurations. So what I've done is I've built a technical specification, and I identify in it exactly what the engineer would do. And then the engineer can then justify or basically debate with you why they want to use a different parameter, right? Which is good engineering and good engineering practice to be able to discuss that with your client and let them know. Educate the client, but don't be conservative. You have to be reasonable and practical in your calculations. Watch out for errors and omissions in your report, and any misinformation to the client. We need to get these reports right, and we've got a decade of reports that aren't right. Next slide. And again, I created a table where I indicate what electrical equipment should have what box electrical configuration against it, and then the engineer would justify otherwise. Next slide. This is all done through a scope of work and technical spec, and again, you stipulate the label so that we get compliant equipment labels out there. I've seen so many labels that are just off the wall and aren't accurate and miscommunicate the information to the electrician, the qualified person. It's unfortunate. Next slide. So again, this whole thing with the 40 cal myth, and that was a question earlier, and I know there's been probably some more questions coming in, but the blast pressure has been miscommunicated. 40 calories per centimeter squared is not a dangerous energy level, and PP does exist up to 140 cal. So every report that had this in it was wrong and misinformed the client that report was delivered to in the last decade, right? 140 cal suit's been available for the last 10 years. 100 cal suit's been available for the last 10 years. 75 cal suit, or 60 to 65 to 75 has been available for the last 5 years, right? There's no correlation between instant energy and arc blast pressure. Dr. Ralph Lee, an electrical engineer from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, I'm proud to say that, did some of the original research and theoretically came up with the original formulas and included blast. And he then said, and if you advance the slide, right, there's a graph that arc blast pressure doesn't correlate to incident energy. It correlates to distance from the point of the arcing fault and the arcing fault current, which will be less than the short circuit current or the bolted fault current. And that's been known since the IEEE 1584 2002 edition. So this is the original research. And again, blast pressure has no correlation with incident energy directly, and it's not what it's been made out to. It is not going to pulverize workers, right? In fact, having the equipment door open will relieve any pressure that may occur very quickly. Having closed doors may build the pressure up, but there's no evidence, there's no statistics that arc blast pressure has caused a fatality in the US or physical trauma. Residually, when you do your job risk assessment procedure, the residual harm, potential injury, damage, health from blast should be repairable injury. there's no evidence of fatalities or significant injury. Well, Terry, there's one, yeah, but a statistic of 1 is not a valid statistic. So arc flash pressure and having, again, this information in reports and on labels is wrong. And if you have these labels, you need to replace them and get incident energy calculated and put the incident energy on the label, not dangerous, no PP exists. You're miscommunicating this to your qualified persons. You need to educate them. You need the incident energy on the label, get rid of categories, get rid of HRCs, get rid of level letters. Level letters came up, level A, B, C, D, E, to correlate the incident energy to PPE. I don't know where that came from, but it's in the software and engineers have used it, right? So 1, blast pressure doesn't correlate to incident energy. Get anything about categories and levels out of your reports and off the labels. Next slide.
So I'm going to switch to PPE, Terry, quickly. We got like
yes.
The 10 minutes. I would like to close it up quickly. Okay.
Yep, evolution. So we'll quickly go through these. So I'll just ask you to advance the slide quickly when I get there. So if you're not aware of it, the lens technology, Oberon Company actually invented it, and other manufacturers then came out with a similar product, but it gave a true color gray, lens, and it doesn't discolor wires. You can see in the previous slide, the picture taken through the green tint and the true color, significant changes, and this impacts life of occurrence positively. So PP can influence life of occurrence. So PP can influence life of occurrence significantly. Look at the green tint on the left and the true color gray in the middle. Amazing. Next slide. So again, this is just a picture where you can see also the LEDs on shields and LEDs on hoods also contribute to life of occurrence positively because the worker can light up their work area. Inside that MCC starter bucket on the previous slide, right, you can see it was very dark. That MCC was in the corner of an electrical room, not well lit, right? So true color gray lenses and get LEDs on your shields and your hoods. As far as the arc flash suits, I said earlier, arc flash suits have been available for 140 cals since the early 2000s, right? So again, these are very lightweight. They're not bomb suits. Electricians call them bomb suits. And I'm telling you, if an electrician wanted to wear a bomb suit like Jeremy Reamer in the Hurt Locker movie, watch it. It's a good military movie, by the way. We wouldn't have an electrician wearing a bomb suit. And this evolution of the fabric, we talked earlier about total system arc rating, the fabric technology, if the vendor for the arc flash suit is making the best use of the fabric technologies out there, these arc flash suits are ultra lightweight now. Ultra lightweight. It's amazing. Amazing. Next slide. So again, look at different suits. So in your electrical safety program, define level 1 as everyday task wear and level 2 is an arc flash suit. And you need to look at suits that are 50. Well, I'm telling clients right now to go all the way to 100 calorie. The wearability of the 100 cal is the same as a 40 cal suit now. And again, we could talk about the reasons why. Even if you stop work at 40 cals, put your workers in a 100 cal suit. That 50% probability of the onset of secondary burn injury goes down when you have a higher APR class suit on than 40. This is a whole area of opportunity here for industry across Canada and in the US. Do a risk assessment. We can have qualified persons working at higher incident energy levels with the same 50% probability of onset of degree burn injury as an 8.7 cal coverall. Next slide. So again, the hood ventilation systems on the left, you'll see what I've seen too many times, which is a computer fan converted to a hood ventilation system. Right? Get a hood ventilation system. First of all, get a hood ventilation system on your arc flash suits. You need to budget and update your PPE. The hood ventilation system is critical for the worker's comfort, brings oxygen to the front, and helps defog the lens. Right? So I encourage you to spend the money and get a hood ventilation system, but get one that's industrial quality, like the one on the right, which is from Oberon Company. It's tubes to the front. No other hood tubes the air to the front. And this is the difference between PPE manufacturers that are out there and what you're faced with, and they're all marketing something different. Take a hard look at hood ventilation system, right, and make sure that it's bringing the air to the front of the hood. Next slide. This next slide, at the IEEE Electrical Safety Workshop, an escape strap was added. So if you do have 2 workers, it's another way to implement the rescue, the mandatory rescue of a worker that's in 70 and Z462. So this is just simply a very strong strap that's connected with a harness. So there's a harness so that it grabs the worker, pulls them back. This is amazing innovation again from Oberon Company, right? So update your PPE, look at these new innovations. They drive down life of occurrence, right? And improve how we react if there's an incident. Now, arc flash PPE works, this next slide. And thanks to Bulwark, right? I was able to get to the KEMA lab and witness some tests of Bulwark's arc flash PP. And again, this was amazing because if it works, if you can ever see an arc flash, which will be difficult, so too many of us to go to these labs, right? So first of all, the PP works. Second, the reason we want 100% natural fiber clothing one underneath is if you don't, that'll melt. That's Scott Margiano with Tyndale. Probably Scott, apologies for mispronouncing your last name, but he's pointing at an undergarment that was meltable polyester. And then the outer garment, the blue Bulwark shirt, it did its job. And the other thing too, arc flash plasma doesn't bend around. Right? You can see on the back of the mannequin, it's brand new. Arc flash, it's a plasma wave that hits you. So it's frontal. It's meant to be facing torso. It doesn't bend around you, but you've got to wear natural fiber, cotton, wool, or silk clothing underneath. It's critical, critical. Next slide. So again, I've had the extreme luxury to attend both arc flashes at the KEMA lab and at the Connectrix lab. So Bhanu, you advanced 2 slides. So the Connectrix lab, I was able to take an arc-rated face shield, the Oberon 17 HV shield, and get an arc flash. I was actually honored to be there with Jack Hirschman, who's the owner. He created Oberon. He invented his own arc flash suits. He invented his own technology. He was there doing testing of his 140 cal suit. And I said, can we arc flash my shield? He said, sure. So we put it on there, and I think we arc flashed at 20 calories, and that's a pass. And you can see the LED still was lit. I was blown away, right? So this PP works. If you're ever exposed to arc flash, it'll do its job. This is what it'll look like, but it's only allowing enough heat to go through to your face, right, for the 50% probability of secondary burn injury. So on the left are these 140 cal arc flash suits, new. They're arc flash. That's what'll happen is that the outer layer carbonizes and blazes away, but underneath you can see the yellow. That's the multi-layered fabrics underneath, right, that give this a total system arc rating of 140 calories HBV, right? And again, the plastic lenses, you can see it melts and it carbonizes, but you scrub that off, right? You scrub that off, and in fact, right, this is what one of those looks like, right? So that's what it looks like after it's arc flashed, right? So this is what it did. It took the heat for you instead of your face. It warped it a little bit on the inside, but only enough heat would go through that, right, for the onset of a secondary burn injury. So this was cool stuff, right? And it works. Arc flash PP works. So the first thing is we need to get it on workers, and then we need to have the right PPE, right, based on inter-energy analysis of the category table method, right? So Bhanu, we're sort of at the conclusion slides. I whipped through that last piece a little bit to address some questions, right? So again, Bhanu, I've noticed several questions about people asking, you know, can they get the slide deck, right? So
yes,
we'll get there in the Q&As.
Yep.
But, you know, because there's a lot of information here in a short time frame, and you know, you said it. I could talk for hours and share what I know and what I've learned over the last 13 years. And I want to let everybody know I'm still learning, and I'm still learning about electrical safety. And I'm going to make a plug here for shock before we get into the conclusion. We need to spend more time on shock. There's too much attention on arc flash, and I'm going to be blunt. Why? Because there's money in arc flash and there's no money in shock, right? So, and that's a blatant statement, but it's true. But shock is the concern, more of a concern than arc flash. Both need to be taken care of. Do not get me wrong. But shock also comes with sequelae, right? Which is there's effects that could, an electrician 10 years, 15, 20, or retired has aches and pains and, you know, memory loss and different, you know, things that are happening to them. They may think it's old age, but it could be because they've been shocked so many times, which is an unfortunate statistic, and it's true, and they never were reported, right? So you don't have insurance, right? You don't have insurance, and meanwhile, you're thinking it's old age, but it's not. You could have sequelae, and Google it, right? Sequelae is having other effects of being shocked that don't show up till later. So I implore everybody, we need to spend more time on shock, and we do need to manage arc flash, but we got to get arc flash right, all right? So again, I'll go to the confusion slide here, that these processes are the same but different. NFPA's process for changing the standard is a lot more detailed, a lot more comprehensive. Get your public comments in now, as Bhanu said, before the end of June. We need as many public comments in Canada as we get in the US, but we won't. Typically, they're getting 300, 400, 500, 600 comments for 70E. I told you we're getting none for Z462. Users in Canada, get public comments in, right? You can't help. I can't help you actually on the tech meeting unless we get comments in, and then I can help interpret them and then promote that they're valid, right? So Canada, get those comments in. Again, you need to interpret these standards. You need to be reasonable and practical, and you need to look through them. You can't say the permit's required for every energized work task, right? It's not. as an example. So you need, and if you can't, if you can't sort it out, get help, right? So update your company's electrical safety program, provide updated arc flash and shock training. IEEE 1584 requires specific interpretation and control panel parameter selection, which I briefly reviewed. And as the owner of the electrical equipment, challenge the electrical engineer doing the study for you, get them to educate you so you understand the decisions they're making for you. And you need to be part of that decision-making process and the parameter selection. Okay. Gap analysis on arc flash PPE. You need to budget and update your arc flash PPE. It's evolved in the last 5 years significantly and has a positive impact on life of occurrence and wearability and comfort and the protection value to the worker if and ever the arc flash PPE is tested. Provide electrical safety program update training. So if you have an electrical safety program, you need to train your workers on that program. And when you update it, you need to advise them of the updates. Next slide, Bhanu.
I think that's pretty much it, Terry. I think before I go to the next slide, I just want to let everyone know that as you try to exit this webinar, just make sure that you fill out your interest. If you want to be discuss about a safety program with me or Terry, just say yes on your exit survey. We'll be more than happy to talk to your unique questions and answer those on a separate call, like 15 to 30 minutes. We can just do it for free of cost, and we can just definitely review what you have and then go from there. That will be a great opportunity for you guys to benchmark with what you have and then take next steps and next actions. Okay. So next one, I'm going to quickly change it to a quick NFPA commercial. It's basically NFPA link. I came to know about it last week while I was sitting on a NFPA training. I just immediately downloaded and just took the subscription of that. So basically what it does is I'm going to just show you on the screen. So all the standards, because NFPA doesn't have a PDF version anymore, you can use this NFPA link. I'm not sure how many of you know about it, so I'm going to show you here. Can you guys see my screen? Teddy, can you see my screen or no?
No, I can't see your screen right now.
No?
Now I can, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So basically, this is what I'm showing on the screen here. This is subscription to the link.nfpa.org, where you pay like $9.99 a month or $45 or whichever the pricing options you want. You get all this specific standards under one dashboard. So I can just quickly walk you through. For example, 70E, if you go and look at it, it'll just open up introduction sections. You can go up to different chapters, right? You can go and deep dive into specific sections. You can bookmark the pages, whichever you want to look at. You can just give you the clear definition, the visibility, right? You can just go and look at all the definitions. For example, these are the bookmark sections, what I have done, and you can go and look at it. And also you can have a correlation between NFPA 70 as well, like other documents. As I downloaded this on my dashboard, you can see NFPA 70, NFPA 99, NFPA 79, all this, right? So I'm talking right now about 13 different standards, all under one dashboard. You have unlimited access for one person or however you want to subscribe to that. It's a great tool. I just want to promote this because it is such a wonderful thing. You can also go into NFPA, and which is like 70, for example. You can go and specifically look at if you have any questions about equipment general use, wiring methods. You can look at the motors. You can look at all sorts of things here. It's a great tool. I think they'll be, again, uploading the other documents as they get ready for the same subscription. That's what I heard. So yeah, go and check it out. That's definitely worth everyone's time, I guess. Give me 1 second before I go back. Terry, you want to take the questions, Terry, really quick?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the questions right now while you're doing that. So I'm just scanning the questions. I've taken some notes down. Again, so far, I've got this question that says, some of the training advises me, the trainer at the front goes, the shrapnel will impale the worker. Hogwash. Forgive me for being polite, right? So again, you're getting bad information from instructors at the front of the room. Do they ever substantiate it? Well, there was one incident. I've never come across, and remember, I'm living and dying this for 13 years. I've attended every IEEE electrical safety workshop since 2006. I've attended other conferences, and I present at conferences. I'm living this. I've never heard of any shrapnel impaling a worker. It's not going to happen. If it does, it would be completely unlikely and a one-up, all right? Someone said, can I get certified to 70? Well, certified is an interesting word. There is no certification training, quote, quote, there is. NFPA 70 as a certified electrical safety compliance professional training, right? You take 40 hours of training, you write a proxy exam, and you'll become a certified electrical safety compliance professional, right? So that is one way that you can become, quote, certified. But the word certified, and there's no one auditing training and certifying training. It's buyer beware with the training. Ask about the company, ask about the instructors, right? Get the course overview, investigate the training you're going to use before you hire the company. And if your workers come back and say, the instructor said the blast is going to pulverize, I'm going to get trapped, and I'm going to bleed out, and it's against the law to work energized, and no PP exists, you need to hold the instructor and that company accountable. Where's the substantiation for all of that, right? Again, that was another question. Oh, fall arrest harness, ASTM F855. The fall arrest harness is automatically 40 cals, and it's so fall arrest harness are automatically, as long as they're ASTM 855, ARC rated. Again, the comments I've made on the arc flash studies, there's not enough time to go into it, but you can contact me offline. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll gladly talk to you about the problems with the studies. And I'll share a document that I have that explains the interpretation of the parameters. We need to get this right. As professional engineers in the US and PNGs in Canada, you're not doing our profession any favors. Forgive me for being blunt, with the quality of the reports that have been issued in the last 10 years. The misinformation and the errors and omissions are rampant. Sorry. Again, I'm very, very, very critical on that, as you can tell. I'm just going through some of the other questions. Is this a PDF? And so, Bhanu, we're getting
yes,
questions after the PowerPoint. I'll leave that with you. Getting a copy of the presentation. Again, is the higher IE on low switchgear mainly due to considering the electric codes? That is true. So the question is, why did we get 72 or 73? It would have been the HCB box electrode configuration used to come up with the new arc flash PV category method, or category 5, right, in Z462. Clarify why the level 5, you also mentioned the arc flash 106 and 140 perform the same. Because they do. So all of the PP, whether it's single layer or multi-layer, is tested, right, to ASTM F1959 and fabricated and constructed to ASTM F1506. So all arc flash PP that has that certification from the supplier under an arc flash. So if an instant energy is 100 calories and I'm wearing a 100 cal arc flash suit, the performance will be 50% probability of the onset of a secondary burn injury. Any PP, any ATV, that's its performance rating. If I'm wearing 40 cals and the instant energy is 100, I'm not adequately protected, and the burn injury probability could go up to 100% second degree and possibly third degree because you don't have enough PP on. All right. So again, these arc flash suits have been available for a long time, but everybody was pigeonholed by the engineers doing the reports and putting 40 cals dangerous and didn't substantiate in the report. They did, and they said blast pressure, and they didn't even substantiate that. Right. So again, a lot of misinformation and myths on arc flash have propagated in the last 10 years. If you want to talk about those two, get in touch with me. Ethan is not done by 20 lecture reflecting levels that are low. So again, the power engineering software embeds the IEEE 1584 formulas. You can select the 2002 formulas still, but you shouldn't because they're no longer valid. So all studies done going forward after November 2018 should be using the 2018 edition. But the engineer now has different parameters that they have to select. And if they don't select them, let's say properly or neutrally, they're going to be conservative, then they're going to yield potentially higher incentive values for certain electrical equipment and certain work tasks, which is the horizontal conductor box electrode configuration. Right? The VCB, the vertical conductor box, and VCBB, vertical conductor box barrier, right? The VCBB was new. That's where VCBB actually yields slightly lower incident energies than previously, and VCB might be slightly higher, right? So it's the HCB that's the problem. If it's blanket used across the board, everything can go up to 200%. 200%. Links to the references. Again, some of the references were 7E, Z462, and 1584. You got to buy them, right? Or 7E has an online free version, and Bhanu showed you the new NFPA link, right? So again, you got to buy the standards and have them, and then this interpretation, which is what this webinar is all about. Why another category 5? It creates a false sense of safety with electricians that it's okay to work on energized equipment. All documentation states that no work on energized equipment unless it's life safety equipment. Adding another whoa. 70E and Z462 say we want to de-energize. That is our priority. And then energized work is justified. What we want to get rid of is energized repair and alteration, right? Diagnostics and troubleshooting and isolation work tasks, racking in and out power circuit breakers, installing grounds. We need that to continue to happen, and electricians have to be confident. What's lacking, which will impact risk, is if electricians aren't confident, the life of occurrence goes up. So bad training over the last decade, fear, anxiety, you can't work energized, that's doing nothing for the electricians in North America or globally. We need them to be, and other task qualified workers, by the way, we need to be confident that they can work energized, that there's no repercussions. I work for a client in Ontario, and the electrician said, it's against the law to work energized, and we're gonna lose our ticket, our journeyman's ticket. I said, what? I said, where are you getting that from? And then we had a discussion, right? So again, this is a problem. We need to manage this. We're going down a rabbit hole on our flash. The electricians then go, you're the supervisor, you do the energized work, I'll do the de-energized repair and alteration. This needs to stop. And it needs to stop with bad training and the studies coming out with misinformation to the clients in North America and in US. Website's currently under construction. So someone's on board. We actually have someone from FCOG on here. The website's currently under construction, right? So again, I commented that you can get the FCOG papers. There's a whole bunch of other papers on there too, actually. So I guess the website's down for the moment, but go back there. Thanks for that comment from Jennifer Martin with FCOG. If I'm using the compliant label, is that also fulfilled? So the labels, the equipment label requirement is the same in Z462 and 70. What it says you should have on the label, if you have instant energy analysis or the arc flash category method, and the use of the results tables is now allowed, right, for large industrial supervised sites. So I'm actually, for large clients I have, I'm telling them, get rid of those labels. They've been a problem, costing you a fortune and errors, and just give the results table. An electrician can read that results table. It's easy, and then you can better manage updating the information because you just the results table, right? And that's one that's previously dated and previous revisions is now obsolete. So large industrial supervised sites recommend you going with results tables and a generic label. Are those tables of comparison? No, the tables I gave you for 1584 were from 1584, the 2018 edition, interpreting that, right? So some of the parameters were in the 2002, they're still there, but then there's new parameters that have been added and new requirements under some of the parameters. You need to get 1584, buy it from IEEE, and make sure you understand the differences between the 02 and the 018. And yes, the software from the vendors, they have good manuals, they'll tell you, but really as an engineer, you have to have the standards, right? Buy the standards. 1584, buy that. It's awesome. 1584.1, and in these studies, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to update your report and give a better report as far as quality and content to your client. There's been a suggestion to hold qualified engineers accountable for electrical configurations, or we also discussed the lack of physical access. Again, I told you that the engineer has to make some assumptions. It's valid in any engineering, mechanical, electrical, civil. You do not need to go out as the engineer. Now, in the US, there might be more prevention against liability. Well, put disclaimers in your report that it's not reasonable to go with a tape measure. We're using typical data or manufacturer's data. That's good engineering, right? We don't need engineers personally going out to the site so the engineer can see it and take the tape, because you won't open up the equipment energized. So on gaps, and you got to use typical data. And ironically, I don't think the gaps has potentially a significant impact on its energy as the box electrode configuration. Right? Is it safe to assume higher, greater equipment damage? Would it be a prudent management decision to cap working energized at X? Well, in your electrical safety program, ultimately you can still have 40 cows as a stop point, sure, but I don't recommend it, right? You need more flexibility with respect to how much money you're willing to invest to try and get to below 40, right, with substitution or engineering safety by design. You got to balance the cost and the technical capability with PPE, right, and put more focus on life of occurrence so we never have to test the PPE, right? So do a risk assessment. It's an amazing tool to make decisions, but don't be conservative in your qualitative risk assessment, because you'll shut your entire site down because we can't do energized work anymore. It's high risk. It's not true. If we apply the hierarchy of risk control methods and the worker applies them in the field and we have evidence that they applied them with a job safety planning form, the residual risk will be low risk for energized electrical work as long as we have arc flash PP that's greater than or equal to the instant energy and up to 140 is valid. Again, a lot of debate, a lot of pushback is going to occur on that. But if you do the risk assessment, it's valid. right?
Hey Terry, we'll take two more questions, Terry, and then probably what we'll do is we'll go through all the questions and probably send out a summary of most important relevant ones. Make sense?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions here, Bhanu. Like,
that's right. Yeah, I mean,
you recommend eliminating danger and warning labels. Well, I recommend a danger label, but at 140.1 calories danger label, right? Because technically in a risk assessment, there's PP up to 140, even if you don't have it, right? And let's see here, 70 allows for site-specific levels. Well, site-specific levels, like, so in your electrical safety program, define your arc-rated level. And we're going to have, but it's between 1.2 and 12. Well, we decided on a 10 calorie coverall or a 12 calorie coverall, right? Or we decided on a 100 cal arc flash chute. But I'm compelling you to look and get away from the 40 cal, right, blinders that you have on. It was complete misinformation about blast pressure and the flexibility and ensuring that you have adequate protection, but you can get work done at higher incident energy levels. And the new 1584, if you get higher incident levels, all of a sudden you can't rack a power circuit breaker out because it's 45 calories. Or 60 calories or 70 calories, then buy a 100 cal suit or 140 cal suit. Don't limit yourself based on what the engineer tells you is dangerous, because they don't determine dangerous. You're the employer. You do the risk assessment. You do the risk assessment, right? So just quickly, I'm scanning through the last option to work. Again, the last option to work energized is, but unfortunately, you need to understand this topic. You're misunderstanding this. In your company, your policies should say we will be energized, but we have to have energized diagnostics and troubleshooting and isolation work tasks until the end of time, right? Because we have electrical equipment that has to be diagnosed and troubleshooting complete energized. So you're somehow, there's some questions here, and I'm going, how are you arriving at this? That we need to stop all energized work. We can't. We can't stop it. Diagnostics and troubleshooting, testing for absence of voltage is energized work. So we can't even test for absence because it's dangerous. It's not true. If you truly understand risk assessment and use it as a tool, you'll get clarity on this. You'll get clarity on this, all right? And again, please, Sequoia, it's, if you Google it, it's S-E-Q-U-A-L-E-A. I even screw up the spelling, but put it in, you'll find it in Google and check it out, right? And there's actually some research in Ontario from the St. John's Rehab. And if you want more information on that, get in touch with me. There's information in Canada. I don't know if it exists in the US, but it's identified now. And I'm actually working with an electrician out of Edmonton, Alberta, named John Knoll. You'll see us on LinkedIn now. We're trying to get the profile up on shock specifically and dealing with sequelae. And it's going to be one of my missions going forward to keep that current, and that we need electricians to understand that, all right? The 2-second rule. All along, the 2-second rule in 1584 was allowed, 02 or 018. So basically, if the engineer models the protective device and against the fault current and it doesn't open, human response to harm. Your brain is the fastest computer on the planet. You will be moving away from it within milliseconds. So a 2-second gap was decided at some point in time that human being and our brain is going to move us away in under 2 seconds. Plus, if there is blast pressure, pushes you back. So if the engineer doesn't use the 2-second rule, you're going to get infinite instant energy. So it's a valid assumption for the engineer to use the 2-second, fix it, and calculate incident energy. All right. So again, lots of information. Many people asking for a copy of the PowerPoint deck. Great overview explanation. And typically say, Barry, can you provide a list of literature recommended in this webinar? Again, so lots of questions here, Bhanu. I think I'm close to the end. I'll do one more. 70 states that site-specific PP allowed on labels. Oh, sure. So you can put site-specific PP, but just put level. Do not have the whole list of the PP. I see labels where it lists all the PP, and the engineer put that on there, but the employer is buying the PP, not the engineer. So if it's got the whole list on the label, and that's not what the employer's bought, there's a conflict. So I do recommend that you put on your label, please reference company electrical safety program for PP requirements. Or generically, the engineer puts, please reference NFPA 70E for our class PP requirements. And then the employer can say, please, electrical safety program level 1 or level 2 arc-rated clothing, right? But ultimately, do not use HRCs, arc flash categories, level letters, or a detailed description of the PP on the label. We want the worker to select the arc flash and shock PP from what you've provided them. We need some decisions made by the qualified person and documented on a job safety planning form, which is now was mandatory a couple editions ago, but now in the annexes, it shows you an example of a job safety planning form. This is the biggest thing that I find in industry is a qualified person, or what I call the qualified electrical worker, is not writing anything down. Like, they're not writing their decisions down. They're not getting the information and writing it down and then deciding based on the PPE prepared here for them what they're going to wear. All right. So, Bhanu, I think we're probably getting close to the end of our time. We're over, actually.
Yes,
so,
we are over. I think we'll conclude it, and then we'll follow it up with the PDF version of the presentations, and also we'll send a link to the recorded version of this entire 2-hour-long presentation to all the attendees so that they can view it later or share with the teams. And as you exit the webinar, please do take the survey and let us know your interest of whether you would like to get a 15 to 30 minutes from Terry or myself to just talk about your electrical safety program. And also there's a question about if you want to learn more about how permanent electrical safety devices or GRACE products will comply to 70E. If you want to just talk about it, please feel free to show your interest, and we'll be more than happy to get on a call with you guys. Okay. With that, thank you so much, Terry. Thanks for your time. And I mean, we can go for the entire day, as you said, right? So, so we'll definitely look forward for the next webinar. We're doing one with another webinar next week. I think that's with on the importance of electrical maintenance when it comes to electrical safety. We'll see a note out from Nick probably in a day or two. So just feel free to register for that webinar. And that'll be a lot of content, how you can apply the maintenance practices as they relate to electrical safety at workplace. Okay. Thank you so much, Terry.
So, Bhanu, thank you again for all your efforts in electrical safety, and I really, again, enjoyed the webinar today, and I'm enjoying having our discussions and sidebars and providing these live streaming events and these webinars. So thank you very much, Bhanu.
Thank you, sir.
And Grace Technologies for providing this webinar today. Any questions, as Bhanu said, get back to us. I'll gladly talk to you about all this offline. I'm on LinkedIn. Get in touch with me. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Take care. Be safe out there.